You so much. I'm really grateful to the South Asia Institute for the work that y'all are doing to uplift South Asian artists. It's really, really phenomenal work, and I'm really thrilled to be a part of this conversation today. Um, my name is Karim Ahmad. I use he and they pronouns. For anyone who's tuning in with low vision, I am a Pakistani man of medium brown complexion with short salt and pepper hair and a beard. I am a writer and culture strategist, member of an organization called the Guild of Future Architects, and the founder of the Restoring the Future Network, which is a network of culture organizers that are designing and prototyping and proliferating more restorative values practices across our media arts system. So, welcome everyone to what I know will be a really exciting and provocative conversation with my friend, filmmaker, and journalist, Habiba Nosheen. Habiba, I'm going to do that really awkward thing where people read their bio in front of you. So you're just going to have to, sit there and listen to it.
Okay.
It's the most awkward thing in the world. We've all done it.
Yes.
But I want to make sure everyone understands and really, really grasps the full breadth of your creative practice and your professional history, which it's one of the reasons why I'm excited to chat with you here is because it has traversed so many different spaces in a way that I think is going to be really fun to dig into.
Thank you.
So here we go. Habiba Nosheen is a three-time Emmy Award-winning investigative reporter and a filmmaker. Previously, she was the co-host of CBC News investigative documentary program, The Fifth Estate, and investigative correspondent for CBC News. Prior to the CBC, she was with CBS News 60 Minutes in New York, where her work earned her 2 Emmy Awards. She was also the director and reporter for the Emmy Award-winning documentary Outlawed in Pakistan, which is how I first got to know her, collaborating on that project, which aired on PBS Frontline. The film premiered at Sundance, where it was called Among the Standouts by both Sundance and the LA Times. Her 2012 PBS investigation to adopt a child earned her the Gracie Award for Outstanding Correspondent. Habiba also held the prestigious NPR Kroc Fellowship. She collaborated with This American Life and ProPublica for the 2013 radio documentary What Happened at Dos Eres, which was called a masterpiece of storytelling by The New Yorker. The story was later adapted into a film by Steven Spielberg and HBO called Finding Oscar. Habiba is a graduate of the Columbia School of Journalism Master's Program in New York, and her reporting has garnered numerous awards, including 3 Emmys, as I mentioned previously, the George Foster Peabody, the Gracie Award for Outstanding Correspondent, 3 Overseas Press Club Awards, and the New York Festival Award, and the Third Coast Audio Festival Award. She's also earned 3 nominations for the Livingston Award, which recognizes the work of top journalists under the age of 35. Habiba was born in Pakistan and moved to Canada at the age of 9 as a refugee. She is fluent in 4 languages. She teaches courses at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. And this is my favorite part of your bio. Your guilty pleasures include listening to terrible 90s pop music and baking cupcakes. Welcome. I'm really
Thank
excited for this
you.
conversation, as I
Yeah.
mentioned, partially because I've just known you for a long time. And this was, for me, just an excuse to chat more about your work and to catch up. And it's also just like really a joy to be able to talk with you about, as I mentioned, this expansive body of work that you have. And like I mentioned, because your work really sort of transcends forms and cultural spaces, which I know our audience is going to find really compelling. And so we're going to talk today a lot about journalism, but also like really deeply personal nonfiction filmmaking. And your recent podcast, The Disappearance of Nusaiba Hassan on Spotify. But I think we're also going to talk about representation and community responsibility in storytelling a little bit, which
Mhm.
is something that's really personal to me also, and something, again, that I suspect our audience members are deeply invested in as well. So welcome, Habiba. It's great to have you
Thank
here.
you. Thanks, Kareem.
Okay, so I thought maybe we could just begin just with walking us through a little bit of your origin story as a filmmaker. How did you begin your journey
Wow.
in the field? I'm also curious to hear you speak a little about like, because again, you've traversed these different spaces. Do you identify more as a journalist or an artist, a confluence of both, something else, and why? So I'd love to just hear you sort of talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I I did this is not the career I ever thought that I was going to have. I was really excited about a career in academia. I was finishing my master's degree in women's studies, and I just wanted to be a women's studies professor. That's how that world made sense to me, and that's where I was headed. as I was applying for my PhD, I was going to Pakistan to do my research for my master's project. And a journalist knew my prof and said, oh, I have a student who's going to Pakistan to do this research. And this journalist approached me and said, while you're there, do you mind, recording your interviews that you're already doing to possibly do a story for us? And I was like, okay, sounds good. And I think I had like a 5-minute crash course on how to record audio at the back of a bar or something. Like that was it. And I was like sent off. And I came back and I produced this radio documentary that was about the experiences of same-sex females in Pakistan in same-sex relations. And it was honestly the most inspiring thing I had ever created. And it just felt like, oh my God, I could be doing this. Like, you write an academic thesis, you spend years on this, and 5 people read it. Right? So that was sort of the reach of that, really, like, that we can put this thing together and it can be out there in the world, and people beyond your little circle get to talk about these things that I want to talk about. So that's how I became hooked on journalism initially. I then went to, as you mentioned, journalism school at Columbia, and I focused on documentary filmmaking. That was sort of, the thing that was what my master's project was on. And that was right after that, I I got the Kroc Fellowship at NPR, which is essentially a year of like super amazing experience of working with like the best journalists in different capacities. And that's where I think my radio passion sort of comes from. It really just sort of, first of all, coming out of grad school or any school and being able to report for an organization like NPR, which has like, brilliant minds, it was amazing. And if anyone's interested, I would highly recommend you apply for this fellowship. They accept 3 people a year. And so it's just a wonderful experience. And you do not need to have a journalism background to apply. One of the people in my class was not a journalist. And and now he's the host of It's Been a Minute with Sam Sanders. So it's Sam Sanders. We were in the same year. And it was from there that I knew I wanted to tell stories beyond the US. But I was too young to like have anybody hire me as like a correspondent of any kind. So what I thought was the best way to not wait 10 years to tell the stories that I wanted to tell was I became a freelancer, and essentially I would travel around the world. I would pick a country that I wanted to go to, and I would pick the stories that I wanted to tell. I would pitch those stories to news organizations. And what you learn pretty quickly if you want to make a living being a freelancer is you've got to be able to do multiple things. So I would pitch a story for, say, video, and I would also pitch a companion radio piece for, a radio station. And I would tell them that this is, I'm going to Pakistan or I'm going to Nepal, and this is a story I think would be great for you. And this other organization is also interested, and they will be getting an audio version of it. So it allows you to repurpose or collaborate with lots of people with the same content. And I became good at that. It's like taking this content and turning it into different kinds of stories for different audiences in different mediums. And I think that was an amazing exercise to sort of, it trained my brain to constantly think of multiple ways to tell a story. And, it began with just the necessity of it, because you needed to you need to eat and pay rent. So, that's where it began. But like, I think that's sort of what drives me to constantly work in different mediums, is like, I truly began to think like that. I began to think about, how do I tell this in print? How would I do this? And so when I think about a story, it really begins for me at that process is like, I want to tell this story. What's the best way to tell it? It's never an automatic, it's going to be print, it's going to be audio, or it's going to be a documentary. It's always, what's the best way to tell this specific story? And then I go and do that. So after being a freelancer, I became a mom, and I felt like my world was just so small, right? Like I was not meeting people. I was never leaving my house except to go on assignments. And I thought, I want a job. I want to be like having conversations next to the water cooler. And so I that's when I joined 60 Minutes. And then I was there for 2 years. And then after that, as you mentioned, I moved to Canada, where I was originally from. So that's been sort of my journey. It's a question about like if I consider myself an artist or a journalist. I think if they ever compete, journalism wins. But I think more and more we're seeing journalism as a tool to tell these stories, to reach people whose narratives just weren't part of the discussion. And I like being grounded in I guess the principles of journalism, because I think I believe in it. Like it's something I truly believe in. So it's not like I'm doing this piece of journalism for this project. It's truly, I want to be fair to people. I think it's an incredible honor to be able to tell the stories of people. And anytime somebody sits down with me and gives me their time and talks to me for an hour about, whatever is going on in their life, no matter why I'm interviewing them, it could be a murderer, a convicted murderer, or somebody who's been accused of, awful things. I still think you should treat them with fairness. And that doesn't mean that just means give them their fair shake. So that is sort of how I try to think about those interviews. Is always, if I was in that situation, or if somebody I loved was in that situation, how would I want them to be represented? And that's kind of hard to think about when you're like, thinking about how am I going to do this interview with a convicted murderer, to sort of put yourself in their shoe. But I think it's really important. It's to constantly come back to this idea that, am I being fair to this person? If they heard this or if they watched this, would they think this is a fair representation of who they are? So those are, I think, the principles that I draw on, and I like them. So, and it, I do think of myself as a creator, and I think it just allows me to tell different kinds of stories. So they kind of both blended in my world. Does that answer your question?